Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special edition of UCalgary's webinar series, where we will take a whole hour to answer the mental health questions you have for psychologist Dr. Keith Dobson. I'm Deborah Yedlin, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are recording this webinar on the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. We started this webinar series at the onset of the pandemic, when our community needed access to trusted information, research, and resources related to COVID-19. Since then, we have expanded our focus to include a wider variety of webinar topics, but our purpose is still the same: to share and discuss knowledge and insight from UCalgary experts with our community. Together, we can use research and facts to take on the challenges that face us, and mental health is one of them. This is a challenging moment. Many of you have already submitted mental health questions to Dr. Dobson, and most of them relate to the impact of COVID-19. Loneliness, anxiety, grief, worry for the well-being of children and seniors, and communicating with friends and family who don't take the virus seriously. There is a lot for us to cover today. Through research and numerous programs, UCalgary is helping address various aspects of mental health in our community. The Campus Mental Health Strategy is UCalgary's commitment to fostering a campus culture where students, faculty, and staff are supported, valued, included, connected, and able to flourish. The Matheson Center for Mental Health Research and Education, which was made possible by a $10 million investment from Ronald Matheson, supports research and education around the early identification, prevention, and treatment of mental illness. And with a gift from the Simpson family, UCalgary created one of the most comprehensive student mental health programs in Canada, UCalgary Strong. Today's webinar is another example of UCalgary's commitment to promoting mental health in our community and beyond. Many of you have submitted questions in advance, and you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask other questions at any time during the webinar. And we will get to as many as time allows, but if history is any indication, we're going to have a lot left over. Please keep in mind that Dr. Dobson can offer only general advice through this platform. If you have specific mental health concerns, follow up, please, with a family physician or healthcare provider, or connect with other resources that we will share with you throughout today's webinar. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Keith Dobson, a professor of clinical psychology and a leader of UCalgary's Depression Research Laboratory. He has been a guest at 2 previous webinars focused on mental health, where we received an outpouring of questions and comments from the audience. I am pleased to have him with me again to offer his insight, expertise, and advice. Welcome, Dr. Dobson.
Thank you, Deborah, for that introduction. I was going to say that we have to stop meeting like this.
I know, yeah. At some point, we'll be able to meet face-to-face, I hope.
Yeah, you know, I mean about COVID-19, but yes, face-to-face too, yeah. So
we are going to have the question and answer function live at the bottom of the screen. But for the first question, Dr. Dobson, can you please provide a checklist or a chart of mental health, a continuum that illustrates signs, symptoms from healthy to declining? What should we be looking at ourselves in terms of how we're coping, and also our family members and our friends? What do we need to watch out for?
Yeah, so in fact, I had anticipated that question. We knew it came in fact, before today. So I've provided this slide, which is from the Mental Health Commission of Canada. And it's an effort that we've developed to try to explain the kind of continuum of mental health that people struggle with or can struggle with. So it uses a color-coded scheme, as you can see, through green, through red, functioning with mental health and well-being at the one end. And Health Canada defines mental health as not just the absence of illness, but actually effective functioning in different areas. And I'll get back to that in a second. But we recognize that, of course, mental health issues can start to become a problem, and people can slip on this form into the yellow or the orange zone, as the color metaphor implies. And then at the extreme end, you have the potential for mental illness or diagnosable mental health conditions. Those kinds of diagnoses should only be provided, of course, by a qualified health professional like a psychiatrist or psychologist or family physician. But in the mean, we have many people, of course, that are dealing with various levels of mental health challenges or difficulties or problems. Again, so we use that kind of language. Going back to the content areas, again, when we look at this, we look at a whole wide range of different areas of functioning. So it includes our mood, and mood, of course, can vary from positive through the most disturbed or the extreme. The way that we think, so signs and symptoms can include things that worries, for example, rumination, negative thoughts or predictions about the future certainly are possible. In the extreme, you may have, again, thoughts about death or even actions related to planning one's death. Behaviors, and again, a variety of behaviors. I'm sure some of these we'll touch on, but some of them can be effective coping strategies, effective behaviors, and then going through more and more challenging ones. So there's a range of different kinds of things that we look at as signs and symptoms of health through disability or illness.
And it's interesting too, you talk about the continuum, and for some people procrastination is something that they have to live with every day, but the fact that it's part of this mental health continuum, I think, will get some people thinking about where they are in this matrix.
Yes, for sure.
And
we'll talk about some coping strategies too, which might feed into the whole issue about procrastination versus avoidance, and when some of those strategies might be productive or not. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I'm just going to start moving on. There's a question that was submitted by an individual that lives by themselves and their pet died earlier this year. They work from home. They have one part-time coworker. Extended family lives outside Calgary and they have their own bubbles. Their friends also have their own bubbles, but they're limited to interactions because of the recent restrictions. And this individual is more of an introvert than an extrovert, but misses social contact and is worried about being alone for the holidays. And of course, is worrying about the cold winter because we know this nice warm weather is about to end. Zoom meetings don't cut it. What can I do to make it through until spring?
Yeah, so this, again, this was sent in advance, and so I had a bit of time to think about it. And this is actually a complex kind of a question because it deals with a couple of key themes, one of which is loss. And of course, the death of the pet and the isolation and sort of being left alone. So there's the sense of loss and even potentially, the grief that a person associates with pets, loss of pets or loss of loved ones. And then the other theme is isolation or loneliness. And of course, that's something that I think many of us are feeling these days with our physical restriction guidelines. So in terms of the grief, I guess, the first thing I would say is that it's entirely appropriate and accurate. And in fact, it's actually healthy to feel grief. The fact that somebody feels grief shows that you had an emotional connection to the animal or the person or the situation you've lost. And grief can take a lot of forms. So it can be around specific beings or animals or people. It can also be grief around lost opportunity, lost employment, loss of a trip, that you had really hoped for. So again, grief can take many different forms. So it's normal to feel sadness and grief when you lose something. And so I don't think we want to take that away. The other side is the isolation, though, and that is something that we can do something about. So one of the things I've been saying throughout the pandemic is even if we have to maintain physical isolation, we really need to not have social isolation. So we need to keep as much contact as we're comfortable with and as much as we want. And that can take many different forms. That can be, Zoom meetings, which I think most of us are tired of, or other kinds of formats like that. But it can also be reaching out through letters. It can be Christmas cards this time of year. It can be phone calls. Again, it could be many different things. I think one of the things I would suggest is that in general, we tend to be a bit more formal than we need to be sometimes. Like we organize a meeting and then we have the meeting and walk away from it. And maybe I think we need a bit more just simple outreach, sort of being spontaneous in the opportunities that we can have.
Sure. Yeah. And that takes one more decision point out. You just pick up the phone or connect with somebody as opposed to having to plan it. And that's again, one more step that you have to take.
And if somebody can't talk at the moment, they'll tell you that, and you can
Right.
rearrange. Yeah.
Well, I think also when you talk about loss, and it's the loss of all your opportunities to connect with people, that's a huge issue that everybody's dealing with right now.
Yeah.
Another question that's come in is low emotional energy and depression seems to be the norm at home right now. It seems that it's better not to discuss anything that is important and to just let it be. The fact that we cannot go away at any time is making things worse. How can I deal with this?
Yeah. So again, part of that question, I think, deals with that same sort of issue of anticipatory loss, like the lack of opportunity of travel. And so I think, again, it's normal to feel that sense of grief again, or, the inability to do that. So again, I wouldn't try to minimize or pretend that that's not true. The other thing about this question, though, that strikes me is that it sort of talks about the balance between avoidance on the one hand, not dealing with issues, which can be healthy in some cases. So strategic avoidance of things that you can't solve, for example, and focusing on issues that you can control can be a very healthy strategy. But on the other hand, the other side of avoidance is acceptance. So sometimes learning how to recognize issues that you can't deal with and simply accept that this is the way it is right now. And, in the context of COVID-19 and in this holiday season, I think that we all need, as much as we can, to develop a sense of acceptance that things are grim. Chances are they're going to stay grim for a while. We need to develop our coping and resiliency skills as best as we can to manage it. So it's sort of this balance between not avoiding problems, but on the other hand, accepting them, as best we can.
So we have to sort of construct our own Teflon.
Absolutely, exactly right. Yeah, and it's interesting, in psychology, generally speaking, when we think about avoidant coping, so when you're dealing with a problem and if your strategy to deal with it is to avoid or not talk about it or not deal with it, we generally see that as an unhealthy coping strategy.
Right.
We tend to prefer people to do approach-oriented coping, sort of go after a problem and solve it. But in this case, some of the issues that we're facing are really not very solvable, and especially with some of the public health guidance we have right now, it's not necessarily clear that there is something that we can do. So in that sense, accepting and being sad is probably appropriate.
So avoidance coping is okay.
At times, I use the word strategic avoidance. If it's a permanent or ongoing coping strategy, probably dysfunctional in some cases, but if it's used sometimes strategically or selectively, I think it can be effective.
No.
Yeah.
How can somebody get out of an anxiety cycle and break that pattern? Because I think, a lot of people will go round in circles in this, whether it's rumination or perseverating, whatever it is, but this anxiety it's hard to break that pattern. What do you do?
Yeah, so you and I, again, in a previous webinar, we talked a bit about the issues associated with anxiety. And there are 3 psychological factors that are primarily associated with risk of anxiety. That's unpredictability, uncontrollability, and high salience or high importance. So the more that you can't predict something, the more you're likely to be worried about it. The more that even if you know what's coming and you can't control it, you're more likely to be worried about it. And if it's of high importance, you're going to be more worried about it. And of course, COVID-19 has all 3 attributes. There's lots that we can't know or can't control, and it's very important. Theoretically, you could lose a livelihood or even lose a life. So it's very important. So it's entirely predictable. And in fact, when the pandemic began, a lot of us in mental health predicted that rates of anxiety would go up, and they have. My own prediction was that rates of anxiety would go up early on, and then as we got into sort of more stable period, rates of anxiety might go down again as things became a bit more predictable. But that hasn't happened. And in fact, it looks like rates of anxiety continue because people still have ongoing worries. We don't know what's going to happen with the school system in January. We don't know if rates are going to continue to go up with COVID-19. So it's natural, I think, that anxiety will continue. So in terms of breaking it, what we do as psychologists, and sort of our typical strategy, is try to figure out what is it that the person is predicting. So what is the worry about? And then try to look at the realistic nature of that worry. Because again, if there's a realistic concern, then we shift towards, again, a more problem-solving approach and try to figure out ways that we can mitigate the risk or mitigate the problem that's coming. So try to control what you can, and again, accept what you can't. as a strategy. If it's an unrealistic prediction, then what we try to do generally is we try to get people to sort of specify their worry and then test it out and see if it actually comes true. Because we often find that people that are anxious or worried are over anxious. You know, they're predicting things that don't come true. And so if you can start to check out your own predictions and find out how valid they are, sometimes that can help to reduce them as well.
And should you be relying on friends, family members, professionals to do that? All of the above?
You can do all of the above. You can check out, you know, in data sources if you've got, it depends on what the negative thoughts are about, of course. But, you know, you could sort of check with your friends and families if your worries are realistic. You could, again, look at the experts, you know, so there's different ways that you can do that, of course, depending on what the worries are. But yeah, sort of trying to check out, is it a realistic thought? And, you know, so that's one part of it. And then I guess the other part is it a helpful thought? Is it a helpful worry? Because, you know, sometimes worries get you keyed up and anxious and they don't really serve a purpose. So again, trying to figure that out, or sometimes, again, getting help to figure out whether your thoughts are helpful or not can be helpful too.
What about the coping, like distracting yourself with something different that maybe
Sure.
requires a bit more energy or something out of the norm in terms of what you do on a regular basis?
Yeah, I mean, if it turns out that your thought may be realistic, you know, your worry is a somewhat realistic one, but there's not much you can do about it, whatever that worry is, and you find that it's not a very productive worry, you know, so it gets you going, it gets you anxious, may cause you sleep disturbance, for example, but it's not very productive. Then sometimes distraction can be an effective strategy. Right. So again, I think, you know, a lot of these answers we're talking about already are kind of general, you know, so, and there's no one perfect coping strategy.
No.
It really does depend on the circumstance.
So we're in a period of time where people are used to getting together. I mean, we'd be all going to Christmas parties and gatherings and seeing people that we haven't seen for a year in some cases, and that's not happening. There's a question about, you know, there's an extended family that still hangs out together, and this individual isn't comfortable being part of those gatherings, and they try to arrange other things, but still feel like they're missing out and they're missing that connection. Do you have any advice in terms of, you know, that seems to be, there's a bit of a tension in terms of who's adhering to the public health measures, who's not, and the person who is feeling very much out of the circle at a time when we're very used to being part of a circle. So what do we do?
Yeah, this is a tricky one again, because I think there's a couple of intersecting issues here. One is obviously the desire to be connected with the family as much as possible, but then the question about what are the, you know, physical restrictions that we have, again, the public health restrictions, and respecting those, and your own level of comfort. You know, I think all of us need to stop and think about how comfortable we are with or without the public health restrictions. And, you know, they may not go far enough for some of us, they may go too far for others. And so again, people are going to find their own level of comfort. But I think, you know, my general advice again is to look at what are the public health restrictions. If there are some in place, then we should all observe them, because they're there for our best health. You know, obviously they're not just you know, put there for no reason. So I think we need to respect them as much as we can. And I think if you feel uncomfortable with what's going on, if the family members, for example, are breaking the physical restriction rules, you can express that in a way that's caring and considerate. So again, my general advice would be, if you want to confront somebody, is to try as much as you can to talk about your own self. So I feel uncomfortable. I know that the public rules are right now, you know, whatever they are, and I don't feel comfortable breaking them, and therefore I can't be with you. I won't be with you. But I do want to keep contact. And so maybe we can, and again, then you get into alternatives, you know, so whether it's a phone call or, you know, some kind of electronic communication, again, there's different strategies that you can adopt. But I think for the individual who doesn't feel comfortable with what the family or with other people are doing, again, I think the best way to approach that is to, again, take personal responsibility for your own thoughts and feelings, express them, hope that your family members are going to respect you for the way that you're feeling and thinking. And if not, again, I would use strategic avoidance.
Right.
Yeah.
There is that.
Yeah.
And just to continue on that sort of whole notion of Christmas and the time to be together with family, and also other holidays as well, like Hanukkah, which starts this week. This question is about this individual's home has been the base for family celebrations since their 15-year-old daughter was born, and they usually have between 8 and 13 people, and I completely relate. We usually do the same thing.
Yeah.
For Hanukkah, that's not going to happen this year.
No.
This year, she's, they're not going to be hosting a family gathering like so many daughters. Their daughter's very disappointed. But, you layer on top of that, started high school, there's no extracurricular activities, there's the COVID anxiety, and this individual is worried that her daughter might have deeper sadness that's not being expressed. So the bottom line is, how can I assess the mental health of my child without being intrusive?
Yeah.
It's always hard to really get ask the questions you need to, and hope that your child is going to talk to you the way you need them to.
It's absolutely true. And in fact, one of the nice things about being able to see people in person, of course, is you can ask them, how are you doing? And if they speak in a certain way or look away, as if they say, I'm fine, you can pick up the body language. And that's much more difficult to do these days. But if you're living with your family member, of course, you can see the changes. One of the things I was going to mention with the continuum models that I put up earlier is that, we know, in fact, that different people function at different levels of the continuum on a regular basis. So some people are more typically in the green, or some people are more typically in the yellow. And what we tend to look for are changes. So, it's when we see things that are starting to go south, or become more difficult, then we start to raise it. I think what we can do as family members or people that work with others, we can raise the things that we're seeing. So I notice that you're being more quiet. I notice that you're not smiling as much. You're crying, potentially, or, if it's a daughter in this case, you're in your room much more than you normally are. How are you doing? So again, point out the things that we're seeing, the signs and indicators, again, of concerns, raise them. Express your concern, again, not that you're angry, but that you're concerned about it, that you want to help if you can, and ask the person to tell you what they will. Obviously, each person has the freedom to be open and honest, or to dissimulate, present themselves the way they want. But in a family situation, I would hope that there'd be enough ongoing contact that you'd be able to raise these concerns. I've said before, though, I have to just add as a comment that there are two age groups that I'm particularly concerned about with the pandemic. And one of them is sort of the children age 6 or so, 5 to 8, in that ballpark. But basically the age group where people start to recognize who they are as a person in their relationship to other people. Because we've lost a lot of that opportunity, or they've lost a lot of that opportunity now, and especially as we move into school lockdowns or restricted school access, I have concerns about the ability for people to get the sense of who they are in relationship to others. And then the others are people at this age range, sort of the teens through the adult years, or early adult years. Because again, this is the age range where people should be mating and dating, sort of sorting themselves out in terms of the kind of people that they want to be and the kind of people they want to be with. And again, they're losing that opportunity. So I think it's normal, again, that we will see disruptions, probably not just in the short term, but I would predict for some people in the longer term as well. So I think the parent who raised that question is asking a great question. And it's something, again, that they should continue to monitor and ask their child about, and again, if necessary, bring in resources.
And just keeping on that sort of topic of school, how to help kids that are in virtual schooling. Their in-person activities are replaced with Zoom. This little one's 8 and very lonely, and everybody's hungry for human contact. What to do?
Yeah, again, I think this is one of those very difficult situations where, again, I think family members, as much as they can, need to step up. I've heard of some situations, like, not that I'm recommending this, where people are violating the physical restriction rules just because of the need for social contact or physical contact. And again, I think if you can bubble with another family, for example, this might be one potential strategy. Again, reaching out, I think, in as many ways as you can, whether it's texting or emails. Again, children, again, even at age 8, can have these kind of communications. The parents can organize play dates, with friends that they have. So there are strategies like that, even if they're at a physical distance. But these I know are all second best. They're not the same as physical contact. So as soon as we can get back to physical contact, try to reinstitute rather those kinds of practices as well.
I mean, the weather's been great, so you can have some outdoor
Yes.
play days, a little more risk, with a little less risk. But that, as you know, it's gonna get colder. We know that. So
yeah, but ski dates, skating, getting outside even for a walk. If you have a pet, it's a great opportunity to get out with other people. So there are some opportunities like that as well. But you're right, absolutely. As it gets colder, it's going to become more challenging for sure.
So what about sort of communicating about one's own mental health needs with one's partner? This question's about how do I tell my significant other about the severity of my mental illness? Some days I know my partner loves me, but they don't quite grasp the severity or how best to help me. That could be a very isolating and lonely feeling when you don't have the ability to talk to the person who could really help you.
Absolutely. I mean, we actually know from some of the research that's been done lately that, in fact, rates of domestic difficulties, arguments, fights, and even abuse have actually gone up. So I think a lot of people are feeling a lot of stress with, being tied in with other people or connected in with other people. But, I would hope in this case, because it sounds like an intimate couple that actually care for each other and, want to help each other. It could be that the family member that you're talking to doesn't have the information you do about yourself or about mental health in general. So again, providing information could be useful. One of the things I would recommend as a resource, I'll just throw it in right now, but we'll get back to resources later, I know. The Mental Health Commission of Canada actually has a really good resource hub, as they call it, related to COVID-19. And part of that includes things like the continuum model we talked about earlier, talks about different signs and symptoms that people might have. So one thing that the person could do is to share with their partner some of the signs and symptoms that, again, can be a sign of difficulty or stress. We're sort of moving from the green to the red side of the continuum, this kind of issue. The other thing, I guess, that I would recommend for this person is that they need to think about how they want to communicate their problems or their distress with their partner and find an effective way that their partner can hear them. So one idea might be, for example, to say, I have something important I want to tell you. I don't need necessarily you to respond. I don't need you to solve my problem. I just want you to understand. Again, I guess I'm assuming that that's what the goal is. And then for them to arrange a time, perhaps when they can sit down when there are no other distractions, and for the one person to simply say, like, here's what I'm still struggling with, and here are my issues. And hopefully they will get a positive response from their partner who will be empathic and, simply listen if that's the goal. If the person who's expressing the concerns has a bigger goal, like they want something done, they want a change of some kind, again, they need to think about that in advance if they can, and learn how they can express that in a way that maybe their partner can meet that. It's possible, for example, they want some major change in the relationship that's just not possible right now. Or it may be that their partner is themselves feeling really distressed and they can't hear, the fact that their partner is having problems. Right now it's just too overwhelming for them. So again, you need to think about how you want to communicate, what you want to communicate, and then, do it in the best way you can, hoping that you get a positive response. So, and sometimes it takes more than once. Again, that's the other thing too. Sometimes you say it and it's not heard the way you want, and you might need to back up and try a different strategy.
And sometimes partners aren't comfortable opening that box.
That's right. Yes. Sometimes the person listening. Absolutely. Sometimes the person listening themselves feels overwhelmed or feels like they don't know what to do, or they feel like there's a request being made of them and they don't know how to respond to the request. And so they feel themselves inadequate in some ways. So it can cause other issues as well.
Yeah, if they're afraid of offering the wrong reaction or saying the wrong thing. And so they're seen to be shutting down when in fact they just don't know how to respond in a way that's supportive.
That's right. And again, some people have a natural response when there's distress or when they feel uncomfortable to walk away. to avoid. And, again, if that's what your partner's normal coping strategy is, you could anticipate that if you tell them about your distress, they might tend to do that again. So again, in a case like that, it wouldn't be that surprising. And again, hopefully the person who's expressing their concerns, wouldn't take it too personally, but again, is going to have to think about a different way to communicate. Yeah. There are other ways to do it as well, too. I was just going to say, sometimes I've heard of people writing a letter to their family member, so that they don't have to take it in all at once, breaking it into smaller pieces so that the family member can hear it in a way that's, lowering the expectations, saying, I just want to tell you some things. You don't have to say anything. I just like you to understand. So, making it so that the person who's hearing the message doesn't feel like there's an onus or a responsibility on them to do something. So there are some ways that you can communicate differently too that might be more effective.
General question about tools and coping strategies. This person says that they've tried everything for their anxiety, depression, panic disorder. They've tried mindfulness, working part-time, working full-time, exercising, taking various doses of medication, CBT, but nothing seems to work. Some days they feel they can't work and feel like they just are wit's end. They just don't know what else to do. What would you suggest in this situation?
Well, first I have to give whoever with that question credit for all the things that they've been trying, because obviously they're not simply giving up. But maybe, in fact, this would be a good time if we could put up the slides, because we have 2 slides actually on coping strategies, and maybe we could just put them up quickly and talk about them briefly, because this is a good segue into that. Okay, can we get those slides up?
Caitlin?
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
Oh, here we go.
Yep,
there you go. Yeah. So again, I had anticipated that there probably would be a question around what can I do, or how, what are some coping strategies? And this slide and the next one, we'll get to it in a second, highlight just a whole wide range of things that people can do to cope with difficulties. And I would just point out that there is no best or no single best coping strategy. Most of us have about 3 or 4 typical strategies that we go to and we use regularly, and they work in most situations. And with COVID-19, we're facing a very unique set of stressors, a unique set of problems, and some of our typical or usual coping strategies may not be effective. So this is a time, I think, for us to all sort of step back and think about what are our values, what is it that we want to accomplish, and what kinds of coping strategies would be consistent with things that we might do. So things like the healthy lifestyle, I'll just point at that one. One of the things that we've been recommending throughout the pandemic is that people, as much as possible, need to maintain a healthy lifestyle. This would be things like regular sleep cycle as much as possible, eating healthy, trying to exercise, 3 times a week or more, depending on your ability. Get outside, get the natural sunshine as much as you can. So, strategies like that, sort of the healthy lifestyle kinds of things. We might come back to that as well. And then which other ones you use, again, is going to be really, I think, a question of you. The other one on this slide, I'll just pick up social contact. Like, again, I said earlier that even though we have to engage in physical distancing, we should absolutely not engage in social distancing. We're social animals, and again, as much as we can, I think we need to find ways to create and maintain contact. The next slide, if we can have the next slide. Well, I'm not going to speak to all of these issues. There's just too much here. But the next slide.
Here we are.
There we go. Again, just recognizing again that there are some other strategies on this slide, again, that you may need to look at and think about the ways that you're communicating with other people, setting limits and boundaries, like we talked a bit earlier about, with family members, or if people aren't following guidelines and you're uncomfortable, learning how to be assertive and, to express the things you want. And the other one on this slide, I guess, is, really to be honest with yourself, that if you are struggling, to say so, to be comfortable enough to say so. And in fact, one of the things I've been fairly impressed with, I think, right now is how many people are able to say, like, I am struggling, I'm not doing well, I need help. And in the extreme, again, to reach out and get extra resources from a family physician or from other people.
When you talk about maintaining healthy habits, and I mentioned sleep cycle, eating healthy and getting outside, we're hearing more and more about people's sleep patterns being disrupted. Can we talk a bit about that? What constitutes a disrupted sleep pattern? At what point should we be worried about it and seeking more help, whether it's and some coping strategies?
Yeah, so that's a big question, of course. So sleep is one of those issues that both is the consequence of mental health concerns. So when we worry or when we ruminate, of course, sleep can become disrupted. Or if we're eating poorly, again, that can affect our sleep. If we're taking too much alcohol in, which again, we know that rates of alcohol use have gone up in recent months. Now, these things all will affect and disturb your sleep. We also know that if you have disturbed sleep, you wake up the next day and you feel less than ready for the day. And, that's going to affect your functioning the next day. And you can get into a very vicious sort of a cycle. So it's both the result of and the contributor to ongoing mental health challenges. We also know actually from years of research that have been done that when we look at clinical depression, the single best long-term predictor is actually sleep disturbance. So, people that have sleep disturbance, are at increased risk for later mental health challenges. So recognizing that you're having sleep problems is important. Again, sort of, as a first step, sort of knowing that the pattern has been thrown off. Most people have a sort of a usual or regular kind of a cycle they get into, and they know what their regular sleep need is. And again, sleep needs do vary from person to person. Generally speaking, for adults, it's about 7.5 to 9 hours of sleep a night are required for a person to feel, the benefit of the sleep. There are many different strategies for managing sleep. Some of these are things around what we call sleep hygiene. So making sure you have a restful sleep space, that it's quiet, cool, not looking at your smartphone just before you go to sleep and getting yourself anxious. Trying, if you can, to have a ritual that helps you calm down so that you can feel more rested. Going to bed only when you're tired, not going to bed if, it's too early, for example. Trying to have a regular sleep cycle, again, is important. So trying to set a regular time to go to bed, but in particular to get up. So again, if your regular time to get up is 7:30 in the morning, try to do it week in, week out,
Right.
So again, and even on the weekends, because that will help to regulate your next night's sleep. So you make it up that day and you may feel tired if you haven't had a good sleep night or night's sleep the night before. But the fact that you are getting up early or earlier will help you then the next night to be more tired and to have a better sleep. And so that's one of our common strategies, is to set a regular time to get up and really be strict about it. So there are a number of different strategies that can be used. In the extreme, there are some medications that can help people sleep. But again, my bias is that it's easy to get reliant on sleep medications. So if you can avoid them, I would try to do a natural kind of a strategy. If you find that you're regularly drinking alcohol in the evening and then that's making you feel tired or dozy and you're napping before bedtime, that's a problem. So try to restrict your alcohol consumption. If you find that you wake up in the morning and you need 2 or 3, strong shots of caffeine to get going in the morning, that's another sign again that you're probably not fully rested. So again, think about your sleep patterns. So again, there's a variety of things in there.
That's normal.
Pardon?
For some
That's
of us,
normal.
3 shot espresso is something that's been going on for a very long time.
Well, again, some people do have disturbed sleep. And again, if that's your regular pattern and you're still having it now, then that may not be so bad. But again, if your sleep has become disturbed when it wasn't before, or if it's become more disturbed, then that's when you should start to pay attention to it and possibly start thinking about things.
I'm curious about people who perhaps were good sleepers and have stopped being good sleepers, but don't recognize the fact that they're not sleeping well or sleeping through the night as they used to, that it could be an indication of something that could be amiss that they're not recognizing. How do you deal with that? How do you approach that situation?
Yeah, so I would actually put myself in that situation because I am a good sleeper, normally, but we've been going to bed a little bit earlier than usual now because there's honestly our evenings are a little bit shorter. There's less to do, and I won't say which one, but television doesn't do it much for me anymore. I'll put it that way, and again, sort of recognizing that the pattern is not really dysfunctional, but it's not as good as it used to be. It is important. So again, you need to think about what's your baseline, and again, for some of us, we're now talking months ago, and then see whether or not things have become disturbed, and then that's a sign that maybe you should be doing something for sure.
In the question about this too, that there's someone's having trouble getting up for the day, sleeping, going to bed like between 2 and 5 in the morning. That's been sort of their sleep patterns have been disrupted because of online learning. And they feel like the only way to change their habit is to actually have something to do to get out of the house. But obviously that's not possible either. So what should they do?
So this is somebody who is engaging in nighttime learning?
No, it's just online learning. And I think, some people do it at strange hours because that's where their body clocks are. But this individual seems to have had to disrupt their sleep patterns.
Yeah, I mean, there are people that do regularly work nights, and even when they're not working, they will sort of keep the same night cycle. So for some people, this is a normal sort of way of functioning, and it's not problematic. Sounds like for this person, it is a problem though, and they recognize that it's a difficulty. So again, without knowing the specifics of the case, my general suggestion would be is to try to set a regular time to get up in the morning, and to get up, when the clock was off, whatever time that is that you set. And it may be that in the beginning you need to set it at 9 o'clock in the morning and then push it back, to whatever time you think is going to be something that you can sustain. And at the other end of the night, what we normally do is we try to restrict sleep to a period of time where you can have maximum efficiency. So it might be for this person that in the first while they would only get 5 hours of sleep at night. So if they're getting up at 9 in the morning, they would be scheduled to go to bed at at a late time. But then while they're asleep, they get maximum efficiency.
Right.
And as they can do that, then they can extend their night time so they can have a longer time going to bed. But it usually will take, at least a few weeks to get a regular sleep cycle once you've thrown it off as much as it sounds like this person has. So again, it might be a challenge to do by themselves, but there are some guidelines, again, some good web resources on sleep restriction. So that's what you'd want to look up in this case, is sleep restriction therapy and how to do it. And there are some good online guidances for this.
And I guess the question too is that the online stimulus affects people differently and perhaps is also a contributor to the disrupting sleep patterns. Is that fair?
Absolutely, yeah. So I said before, again, in terms of smartphone use, trying to shut it off before you go to bed an hour or so. Same with computers, same with any kind of artificial light if you can. If you can, purposely try to have things calm, in the period of time while you're getting ready for bed. And again, general recommendation would be about an hour or so before, if you can shut off everything, all your electronics, in that period of time. I know a lot of people nowadays go to bed with their smartphone right beside them, and they're getting texted in the middle of the night, and that's not a great strategy.
No.
The best advice would be is to leave your smartphone or leave your electronics in another room where you can't hear them.
Yeah. Absolutely. So one of we talked a little bit about coping through avoidance, but this question's about masking feelings because they just have to get done. You just have to get through the day, whether it's going to work, taking care of kids, dealing with parents that are aging, etc. But at what point do you see that balance point in terms of you're in that injured ill part of the spectrum and you need to seek some help? I guess the question is, sometimes people end up working extra hours to make up lost time.
Mm-hmm.
But the issue is that, things only continue to spiral. I think it's a challenge because you still have to be productive. And clearly this individual, there's that balance point's a little out of whack. So At
Yeah.
what point do you sort of identify and say, okay, I'm on that injured, ill side of the spectrum and I've got to do something?
Yeah. So I guess I would say a couple things again. One is I would be, if the person can go back and look at the very first slides we looked at, in terms of the signs and indicators of people that are shifting on that spectrum down towards the red end. If you see more of those signs and indicators that there actually it just popped up again. We went too far, but anyway, if people can find those signs and indicators, then that might be useful for them to sort of position themselves on the spectrum. But I guess more than that, again, for me, it's a change. Because some people normally function, with a fair number of mental health challenges and signs and symptoms that they're distressed. But if they know that they themselves are no longer able to cope with those issues, that's the kind of time when I think it's very important to reach out and get new resources or get help with different kinds of resources. Again, that resource hub I talked about might be one thing that people might look at. I know we're going to talk about resources in just a few minutes, other resources that exist in our community. But again, to me, those would be the two kinds of things. Look at the signs and indicators and then look at whether or not this is a change. Yeah. The other thing I guess I'll mention too is, and again, this is just, it's an important point, I think, but we haven't talked about it, is we actually know that COVID-19 and mental health problems in general are not equal opportunity players, so to speak. It is not. We know that people that have to work outside of the home, people that have children at home and have multiple responsibilities, women, people in higher social gatherings, like, if they live with other people, so they have multiple sort of contacts, people who are lower in terms of socioeconomic status or people who've lost their jobs, they're at increased and dramatically increased, in some cases, stress right now. And so it wouldn't be at all surprising to see people struggling, if they're in those kinds of situations. So I know there's been some talk in particular about women, again, who've been affected by COVID-19, both in terms of economic lost opportunities and in terms of the multiple responsibilities that they face. So again, if people are feeling that it's more challenging, it probably is, unfortunately.
No, and certainly we've been seeing the number of women that have had to leave the workforce, and so many of them in very productive times of their lives and their careers. So that's, that could potentially have an echo effect down the road, and they're probably seeing that loss of opportunity, but are feeling they don't have a choice.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's true.
How do you separate situational unhappiness and depressive symptoms from broader trends? This is an interesting question. This individual's asking this question because there's a general U-shape for overall happiness, right? We've seen that late 40s and 50s happiness is a structural low. So so let's overlay that in terms of the COVID-19 and the challenges people are feeling. Can you separate these, or does it make it worse?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think in the working environment, so again, so funny, I had a presentation on campus just yesterday, and we were talking about faculty members and, the people that are younger adults, who basically have children at home. A lot of them are feeling extra stress at this point in time because of, the sense of multiple responsibilities. So they're at a point where their careers are developing, where they want to, engage in things outside of the home as much as possible. They've got the responsibilities of having children at home, and so they're feeling incredibly stressed right now. Again, people like myself, again, my wife and my children, they've grown and they're established themselves. In fact, they're in the situation I just talked about. But my wife and I, we're fortunate that we're home alone now, and so we actually have a fair bit of time. In fact, too much time, I would say, right now. So for us, it's been less of a burden than it has been for other people I know. So I do think this inverted U that you're talking about, where people are more distressed early in life less distressed early in life and then less later in life, I think that's actually accentuated by the pandemic.
Yeah. Since the pandemic, this question's about an individual who's noticed ADD and ADHD type symptoms, signs that they hadn't noticed before COVID, and wondering if you have strategies for managing this, and whether it's a cause or reaction to the pandemic, or something maybe that was masked before and they had coping mechanisms to deal with it, and now those mechanisms, whatever they were, are not as accessible anymore.
Yeah, I think all of those possibilities are
Okay.
out there for sure. I think there's actually a number of people who had, again, coping resources that they were able to use before the pandemic that have been lost for a period of time at least. And, again, for some of these people, I would predict that when the pandemic ends, as hopefully it will in the new year, that we'll find that, those resources kick back in and people are able to cope again well. But for people that have, developed new conditions, so again, for example, substance use, I think some of these may well be longer term kinds of concerns. And so again, depending on the nature of the problem, again, and the way that the coping strategy is developed, it could be a longer term problem, something that's worth getting looked at and assessed by a health professional. If again, it looks like it's more just an exaggeration of a normal tendency, my guess is that it'll probably move back towards normal when the pandemic ends.
There's a question about a woman who's 75 years old and living on her own. She's a widow. She says she keeps busy at home, attending webinars like this and making regular phone calls to my similarly isolated friends. I know my 2 married daughters are worried about me. How do I show them that I'm doing just fine?
So I guess I would wonder, why are the daughters worried? So are they seeing something that, the caller, the person I wrote in the message hasn't seen? So I guess I would ask them, what are you seeing that you think that I should be concerned about that I don't recognize myself? You could potentially look at, again, the continuum model or something like that and, say like, here's where I am and this is normal for me and this is, I feel comfortable. And I guess, the other thing is just being assertive, just, simply saying like, I actually feel okay. I'm doing okay. And you might need to say that more than once. Could be a fact that it's a reflection of their own problems, that they're struggling or feeling anxious or feeling worried. And so what they're communicating to you is that, or, to the person that wrote in the question, is the fact that they're feeling worried and anxious, but they're projecting it or putting it onto their mother or the older person.
So question about time. Would you be able to share your insight into how time seems to be limited these days? The physical amount of time is more, but I'm finding that emotionally I'm overwhelmed by the amount of work to be completed and in many ways having to stay connected virtually despite it draining my energy. So interesting, I guess, because we don't have the same kind, we have to travel, there's more time, but
right. Yeah.
For some reason it seems to slip through and there isn't enough to get the work done. What do you think?
So again, I don't know what that person's situation is, whether or not they have some kind of work that may have changed. But again, I have heard a lot of people who are now working at home that they're trying to be as productive as before, and they just can't be, because of the need to set up meetings and then have the meeting and then do the post meeting, so there's a lot of work around. It's not actually work, it's the work around the work, so to speak, so it's becoming less productive. So I don't know if that's what this person is talking about. I also have heard of some people talking about how every day is the same, and so it's easy to lose track of time, and it seems like the weeks go by and you don't know what's happened to them, and so you feel unproductive. The truth is that you may have been just as productive as before, just that they're not as punctuated or not as clear in terms of how they're being seen. So I don't know exactly with this particular person what I would actually say, whether or not it's one or the other. The one thing I have been recommending to some people though is that it's worthwhile, I think, every day to set some goals if you can, some short-term and working on longer-term goals, so that you can actually get a sense of completion and get a sense of satisfaction with the work that you're doing. And I think that helps to punctuate or to accentuate, the day and the periods that you're working on. So that may help a bit. I don't know.
Yeah, it gives you a feeling of accomplishment too. That you've done something to tick something off a list, because in a different circumstance, you've got a whole list of things you have to do, and usually you can get to most of them and feel like you've accomplished something at the end of the day. It's just harder when you're physically in one place for most of the time.
Exactly. The other thing I think is that, with most of us or many people living at home, sort of working from home, the week and the weekend start to blur. They become less obvious. And so again, it becomes quite possible to not know if you're at work today or not at work today, because of those kinds of concerns. I've heard days also, like the work day is starting to blur, where people are potentially, working a while and then they go off and do something in the kitchen and then they come back and work. And, so, the work versus non-work time starts to blur. And again, the sense of time can be distracted as the rule.
Let's talk about how I would actually characterize myself as falling into that category, because I know that I'll work during the day, I'll take a break, and then I'll go back to it in the evening. But you never really feel like you have any downtime at all.
That's right.
So what do you suggest? Just saying my work day is the same and saying there's no work being done on the weekends and that's just the way it is, even though your computer's in fairly close reach?
I would say that's ideal.
Yeah.
But again, for everybody, that may not be possible, of course. But yeah, I think if you can manage that kind of a separation between work and home time, I think that would be ideal. Yeah.
Yeah, I think people have gotten that blurring of the lines has become a bit of a habit right now, and it's hard to break for a lot of.
I agree.
Back to kids, obviously, we're still seeing that online learning is going to stay. How do we help kids in terms of they were quite sad and anxious before they went back online, and now it's increased. Now we don't know what's going to happen in the new year. Question about whether you limit screen time, do you allow it? Like some of the normal coping mechanisms are not available right now, and there's a worry about screen time and other ways to sort of give your children some distractions.
Yeah. So right off, I'll say that I'm not a child expert, but certainly what I've seen in some recent guidance is that you should absolutely be limiting screen time. That children need some downtime as well, just like adults do. That you can't be on Zoom 24/7, and that's not healthy. So again, I think parents need to take some responsibility here to help their children, if they can't set their own limits, to help the children set limits. You need to help the children to figure out ways to be productive, like to chunk work, the work that they have, into meaningful units so that they can get a sense of accomplishment or a sense that something is finished before they move on to the next thing, if it's at all possible. I think, again, children need to have time to socialize and, to have fun. Again, that's an important part of childhood, is just simply recreation time. So again, whatever that would be. I have worries, again, for children who, for example, are now spending a lot of time doing online learning, and then their recreation time is going and playing online games.
Right.
That's not a healthy strategy, obviously. I think, children, we all need physical exercise as well, physical activity. So figuring out what that will be and what kind of social contact, again, that children have. We talked about that a bit earlier. I think that's all important. And again, unfortunately, the burden, when children aren't in the school, falls to the parents to monitor and to help their children do the best they can.
And that because everybody's together all the time, there's always tendencies to avoid conflict. And so
absolutely.
At what point do you say, no, you can't, and then that causes other problems, versus just saying, what, for where we are right now, this is going to have to be.
These are the rules. Again, it's kind of like, if you think about sort of public health rules, you need, again, public health rules within the home as well, in terms of how to get along together and how to maximize health. Right.
And remember that people always want limits, and that's part of it.
That was what?
Kids need limits. They need to know what those limits are.
Of course.
And they can't be,
we all need limits.
Yes. When you talked about healthy eating, and I'm thinking there was a study that was just published in the New York Times about how people are eating more things that are bad for them, whether it's sweets or salt, whatever it is, they're just that sort of those defense mechanisms of saying, yeah, you know what, that's not good for me. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to eat it anyway.
Well, in northern climates in particular, we tend to go towards carbohydrates or sweets in the winter. They give us a short-term burst of energy. We feel good for a while, but they're not healthy for us in the long term, of course.
No, they don't. You go up and you crash. So we're about to run out of time. I just want to make sure we have time to put up the slides for the resources. And I want to thank you so much for answering so many important questions today. And
Yeah, my pleasure. Just one of the things I'll just mention is that in terms of the resources, they've been divided here into sort of two sets. One is tied more to the university community, sort of, it talks a little bit here, this slide about the mental health strategy. If we can go to the next slide though, it talks about resources, again, on campus. So student resources, and it's concerned like if you have a student at risk. So if you're, again, a faculty member or just a friend that sees a student at risk, there actually are resources that are available. The next slide talks about staff and faculty wellness, and again, resources that are available for people that are feeling in distress if they're, again, a University of Calgary community member. And then the last slide, I believe, is for the community at large. The next slide. Yeah, so these are general community resources. Whoops, and there's quite a few here, again, general health kinds of concerns, and then some crisis numbers. And these are all going to be available for everyone. I think the slide deck is going to be available, so anybody who feels the need to reach out and get particular help should be able to do so.
I want to thank you today for all your insight and for candidly answering all the questions. And just to remind everybody that they will get an email with a link to view this session on demand with this list of slides for available mental health resources. If you did find the discussion today helpful, I encourage you to visit ucalgary.ca/community, where you'll find more webinars, podcasts, and stories on topics that matter to you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Dobson. All the best for the holiday season to everybody who's joined us today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.